are joined now by Senior Advisor for National Security and Foreign Policy, Rick Grenell. Rick, we just talked about in the segment 4, kind of set up what was happening in the world right now with what's going on with Saudi Arabia, and we have things like the Wall Street Journal. They're now reporting that the U.S. officials have kind of begged the Saudis and OPEC to delay their decisions to cut oil productions for a month, which would be after the midterms, of course, and they were snubbed at their request. But what does this tell you about the administration's clout now on the world stage when you're hearing, can we get a meeting with North Korea? No. Can we get a meeting with the Saudis? Also no.
Look, I think Biden has been very murky on what his plans were. He messaged to all of us that going to Saudi Arabia was not about oil. He made that clear. He said, I'm not going there about oil. But now suddenly he has been caught where they've been lobbying members of OPEC to delay any decision on production until after the election. As you say, it's clear after the election means it's a political move. But the recent statement from President Biden was that now Saudi Arabia has to be punished. And so I'm confused. If you didn't go there for oil, why are you punishing them now? What was the decision? What was the reason? What was the sudden change that made you say the Saudis need to be punished? I thought it wasn't about oil. At least that's what you told us.
Yeah, and he even said that in the Tapper interview. It wasn't about oil, but then immediately was like, yeah, but we need to reevaluate our relationship with them. Right. Then what's the point? And why now? Why is this the right time when you're threatening nuclear Armageddon, when you're hearing when the stock market is in crisis and gas prices are back rising? Why is now the right time? And Will, you can have another question. Why is now the right time to reevaluate our relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Well, and to play off of that, Logan, it's not just the president here. This is the entire Democratic leadership, especially in the Senate. We're seeing very similar type statements come out, and it's all targeted against the Saudis right now. And my question for Rick, what do you think their end game is?
So, Will, that's a great point about the Senate Democrats too being a part of this, because let's rewind for a second, and I think I answer your question this way. Remember that the Senate Democrats joined Joe Biden, and they dropped the Trump sanctions on the Russian pipeline. And quickly thereafter, we saw the Ukraine war. I don't think it's too much to say that the Senate Democrats dropping the sanctions on the Russian pipeline gave Putin the green light to start a war. So I would put their actions directly at the feet of helping cause a war. You also look at what the Senate Democrats did by removing the Houthis from the terrorist list, working with the Biden administration to make that happen. Then we saw pretty fast missiles launching at the UAE. Now what we see is a move by Senate Democrats to punish Saudi Arabia. I have to say, isn't anyone watching their debacle? Every time they make a decision about the Middle East, it inflames the situation. Right. It's gotten worse. And now suddenly they want to freeze out the Saudis? Come on. We definitely got past them. Got past this difficult period during the Khashoggi situation. We were very blunt with the Saudis. They felt the pressure and the consequences of what they did, and we were moving on. And then Biden kind of brought it all back just to be able to deal with the Iran issue and show the Iranians he could punish them.
That's the calling card, and that's the problem. We talked about this in the last segment, which is sure, we're not sitting here defending the Saudis. We're not defending what happened in the Khashoggi incident and everything that happened there was horrible. But it just feels like the wrong time to be doing this, and it feels like and maybe the wrong person to be leading it. And you brought up the Middle East, and in general, I think Americans, and I would put American Democrats as well, are quick to forget about what happens in the Middle East, because during the Trump time, and I said this during the 2020 election ad nauseum, and I honestly wish it was brought up more in the debates. It was brought up more in when President Trump was running. There was relative peace for years. There was quiet. There was the Abraham Accords. There was all these positive things happening in the Middle East. Something that was very emotional, very connected to personally. So to me, this were such big steps forward. And I told people, if this happens and you have a President Joe Biden, remember that ISIS will be back. Remember that Afghanistan will be in crisis. Remember, you're going to hear about the Taliban. You're going to hear about these things that you forgot about because we have a very short attention span. You may remember 9/11 in theory, but you don't necessarily remember the fallout that happened right after it. You don't remember the 20-year war because all of a sudden things were quiet. Then you have Afghanistan in ruins. Then you have ISIS returning. Then you have all of these things. And now we're poking Saudi Arabia. And when you look at the rhetoric that's coming out of the administration, it's almost as if the idea of nuclear war or war in general is almost inevitable, which is horrifying. It's very scary. I don't personally necessarily believe that, but the way they're talking, the way they're throwing out there, using terms like nuclear Armageddon, it's ratcheting up the rhetoric. It feels like it doesn't feel like there's any sense of control that is de-escalating.
Well, it's certainly ratcheting up the military talk and the war talk, and it's pushing aside the diplomatic talk. I mean, we don't see any diplomatic action. We don't see Anthony Blinken rushing to the area with some sort of a deal. You know, Elon Musk came up with some idea for the Ukraine-Russia issue. Wasn't a great set of points. There was a couple in there that we could probably build off, but they had a couple of points in there that were bad. But he was trying to do something diplomatically rather than just give in to this war talk. And, let's also be very clear that the reason why the Biden administration is currently attacking Saudi Arabia is because they're trying to get an Iran deal. What they're trying to do is show the Iranians that they know how to be tough on the Saudis and that they can be trusted. And so this is all a ploy to build trust with the Iranian regime. So, while they're trying to wag their finger to say, the Saudis are terrible and we shouldn't be dealing with them, they're dealing with the Iranians. And so I think that we need to call them out on that.
Well, and you mentioned the diplomatic efforts here, and we're fortunate to have you because you've been a diplomat. You know this world very well. And the question I have is obviously this diplomatic failure with the U.S. going to the Saudis and trying to get them to delay a deal, regardless of the merits of whatever they were asking for. When U.S. diplomats go and try to frame the issue with the Saudis that if they don't do this, we're going to take it as a sign that you're siding with the Russians. And then is there the potential that they had the unintended consequence of actually pushing the Saudis closer to Russia by trying to frame this entire narrative this way?
I mean, it's a good strategic thinking that you're doing there. And yes, I'm very concerned about that because it boils down to the fact that the Biden administration doesn't have any credibility. Remember, as they came into office, you had Avril Haines who's the head of DNI, head of all intelligence agencies. She repackaged the intelligence on the Khashoggi case and then released it just to stick it in the eye of the Saudis. That's how the Biden team came in. So, and then they were, trying to deal with the Saudis' enemies, the Iranians, on some sort of a new nuclear deal, which would include giving them money, giving them billions of dollars, knowing full well everyone around the world sees that the Iranians, when they get money, they increase their terror. And so you've got that issue, and then you've got the Houthis being taken off the terror list, and the Saudis are looking at the Biden administration and saying, you're crazy, you don't know what you're doing. And so, no, we're not going to help you. But this is the bed that the Biden administration has made. They're going to have to lay in it. And I find it to be consistently bad news for the Middle East every time the Biden team comes up with a new idea. This latest idea to cut ties with Saudi Arabia is a disastrous idea.
Well, thank you, Rick, again, as always, for joining us. I think that was incredibly informative. I know a lot of people are seeing comments come in, so we always appreciate your insight.